obviously this is a very difficult
me when it should be
time for us to have such a small gathering, so
All I can see is not.
it's not even very perfectly small
We can't the servers.
Is the service?
chapel. And of course there are a number of people who are very close to Marion who can't be here. Helen, of course, Ellie, Knox, Genia, Sasha, Pilar, and Zoe are all, you can see here all. There's Ruby, I think Frankie, is Frankie in there? They can't be here today. Paddy and Ruben. And of course, because of these small numbers that we have today, partners can't come, so Lois, I'm sorry about Karen not being here. I know that she was close to Marion. Of course, I seem to have managed that problem by being perpetually single. And of course, I'm very honoured to have this role to be the Master of Ceremonies for the funeral. Marion and Peter called me on about the 2nd or 3rd of January this year when they were planning Marion's funeral. And I had just left a film that I went to at the Lincoln Centre, and I was walking across a freezing wind tunnel to the subway in New York. I was somewhat shocked by this call. They were calling from the tropics of Waipu, and nothing really sounded that wrong. I imagined how Marion is when she's at Pete and Alice's. She's so happy to potter around, sitting on a folded up towel, pulling up weeds from the eating tiles, digging potatoes from the crumbly dirt while wearing a cardigan and pearls. It just really seems like Marion was so strong that she could never die. And the film that I had just been to at the Lincoln Centre was called Agnes by Varda, and it's a self-made retrospective by the French filmmaker Agnes Varda, and she had just finished making the film that year, just a couple of months before she passed away. And she was actually born in 1928, the same year as Marion. And Marion and I had been to see one of Varda's films together in 2017. And that one was called Faces, Places, and it was about this artist Varda and another young French artist who was in his 30s, and they travelled across France together, meeting people in little villages and creating art. And sitting in the movie theatre, their relationship felt like a mirror to mine and Marion's, which is young and old together. And certainly Marion shares many qualities.
The syphilis.
Playfulness, it's exploration, a deep love of art and music, travel and people.
Stop talking.
I continue to have conversations with Marion right after my last saw her before we went into this lockdown.
Or can be transmitted.
And ideas that we've never talked about.
That's correct. Yep, absolutely.
Her life, I'm certain,
also,
will
we have
many
yeah. So
my aim today is to guide us through the program that we have.
That's
for people on Zoom have the program, and I'll also just make an apology straight off to Lewis. We're sorry that for some lack of communication, the item wasn't in there. So Lewis will be doing giving some words after the Irish blessing. So you can look to me as I guide you through each part of the program, and as you can see, we'll have a mixture of words and music. The words are really a time for us to recall some stories about Marion, and the music is a time for us to meditate and we can really lift our spirits physically and shake off some of our energy in our bodies and bring that up into the space above us. And I'll also try to keep as much lightness as I can through this, mainly so that I don't break down myself, but also to give you the chance for some relief. So please, if I do make a joke, you can laugh.
I'm getting time.
And I recognise that this whole thing is a new thing to have people on Zoom. So we've said hi to a few people, and I hope that everything's clear and you can hear me and see me, and you'll be able to see others and hear us. Maybe I'll nominate Ali to give me a text. I've got my phone on me if anything goes awry. And I really hope that with the Zoom function, there is the ability to create some intimacy even at this distance. And I think being able to see each other, you being able to see each other on the screen is also something special that we don't get to see do in a regular funeral. So being able to share your grief with each other. And of course, please unmute yourselves when we sing at the sing parts, because we want to have the full effect of this new digital funeral that we're in. So on that note, I will pass it over digitally to Knox to do the eulogy, and if you just bear with us while we figure out how to unmute Knox so that we can hear Knox. Okay. Bailey, do you want to try and do that?
Sure. Shall we move the computer around as well, just so it's facing us?
We can leave it there, and
Okay.
then we can come so here.
Okay. So if we go to, I need to find him, and then there he is.
There he is.
Hi, Alice. Hi, everybody. I'm Knox. Marion was my mother. I was lucky enough to have her for 64 years. Recently, Marion, in a conversation with Libby, told Libby how she had such a happy life and how much she appreciated that. Which is interesting, because if you look at the distinct phases of Marion's life, she had many adversities in that. And looking back, obviously, she wasn't focused on any of those things, but focused only on the positive things that had happened to her. I mean, Marion's life had many distinct phases as she went along, and they're quite different from most of her peers. The things that happened to her that were adversities were a great rift in her family after her father died, my father dying very young and suddenly, and obviously our sister Helen's untimely death. But Marion was always resilient, almost to the point of being indomitable, and she was always positive. And she was always very interested in other people and participated in other people's lives and made new friends at every phase of her life. In 17 years in the UK, she had a great time with her friend Pat Troop. Pat was actually her cousin. She would go down and see Pat almost every weekend. They would garden together, have parties. Pat would make cucumber sandwiches. When she came back to New Zealand, after obviously many years away, she made a new friend who moved into her building. Betty moved into the building and had an introduction to the building from Marion, who introduced her to all of her friends in the building, had parties for her. And Betty wrote a very nice card to Libby saying that her life in the building was enhanced, or was really made possible because of Marion's involvement and how Marion had helped her settle in. Marion and her friend left for years, would travel together. And one year in Assisi, they met Sue and Lisa, the girls from Australia. And they made a great friendship, even though Sue and Lisa were the age of Marion and Liv's children. And for years, the girls would get together and travel, or go on trips together, or just hang out together and have a great time. And that was a huge part of Marion's life and came very late in her life. And the girls wrote a very nice email recently saying how much impact Marion had had on their lives and how nice it had been for them, that friendship, and how important it had been to them. Marion was always very adventurous and very brave. After my father died, she decided that she didn't want to have a settled life in Heratonga with all of the friends she'd known for 20 or 30 years, what would have been a very stable and predictable life. Instead, she packed up, even though she was sort of lacking self-confidence, but she was resilient and knew she had to do something. She packed up and she went off to England to look after, or to help Libby, to help Helen with her children, and stayed on and helped Libby when Libby moved over there. Bought a house, stayed there for many years. looking at another phase in her life when she was in her early 20s after nursing school at Wellington. She went on a long trip and stayed in England for a long time with her friend Nancy. She hitchhiked from Land's End to John O'Groats. They had a plan. If there was any trouble, one of them was always in the backseat of the car with a pot. So if there was any trouble with the driver, they could hit the driver over the head with the pot and escape. But happily, nothing happened. She was always very adaptable to changes. Wasn't stuck in her ways. She could change her mind. When Libby started working at the University in Wellington, Marion went to almost all of her lectures on sustainable cities. And as a result of that, she changed her views on how people should be treated. All of her friends were very interested in preserving parking for their cars. Marion became interested in bicycle lanes and pedestrian malls. Marion's grandchildren had a very special place in her heart. For each grandchild, she crocheted a blanket, which I think everybody has one. She decided that she wasn't going to give grandchildren birthday presents because there were just too many and it was too complicated. So she opened bank accounts for all of them. And every Christmas she'd deposit money in their bank accounts. So obviously the oldest, Mia, has the most money because she had the most accumulation time. You know, Marion spent time in England with Libby and Jeremy when they were there in Bristol. She was in London when Helen and Ali were in London with their children. Every year she would arrange things so that she would spend the summer in Europe. Libby counted up that one summer she went to France 9 times. And she would come to me in the fall and help me look after Zoe. So she'd come when the weather was nice in South Carolina and leave, you know, after it was too hot, she'd get there. And then she would leave before it got cold for the winter to be back in New Zealand in time for spring. And she was a very strong and independent woman in a male-oriented world. She was determined and direct, but not very loud. For her 90th birthday party, which was one of her high points, she invited all of her granddaughters to make a serial speech, which was a great thing at that event. And the granddaughters passed it off extremely well. She was, however, very direct and very determined. Pete has a wonderful story that Marion, in our old house in Heratonga, the neighbors were having a party that was too loud one night. So Marion sprayed them down with a garden hose through their windows into the party. I guess it was to get them to close the windows. I remember being in a restaurant, a very beautiful restaurant in Italy with Zoe. And so people were smoking at the table next to us. Hardly surprising in an Italian restaurant. But Marion got up and fanned them away with the menu until she embarrassed them into stopping smoking. So I think
should know that.
And I remember Pete's photographs of Marion sleeping on furs in the ice hotel, the Arctic Circle, where he was going every year to take photographs. So I think if you look at Marion's life, the lesson she left for us is that you should be fully in control and have no regrets. Libby was worried when she was living in England that she would never come back, except in a box. But she did come back. She had no regrets. She bought a lovely apartment in Wellington and started a new life, and which lasted many years. She was extremely social, and she had a wonderful time connecting with new friends, with all of her old friends from Heratonga and all of her old friends in Wellington. She even joined the Wellington Club and recently joined the Croquet Club. She used to tell me how great the Croquet Club was. She'd go over there and she'd see all these oldies having such a great time. It turned out she was the second oldest person in the club. So I remember when, on my last visit there, with Pete, we were joking about something, and I said, I can't remember what it was, but I said that my father forced her into doing it. She sternly told me off and said, no, he didn't force me into doing it. I made my decision and I decided to go ahead with it. So that's the lesson from Marion. To be in charge of your own destiny. And to be surrounded by friends and your family. Thank you.
Yeah. No, she did. She never got me.
You were tossing up before.
It's in the chat room, isn't it?
Mute all. Continue. Unmute here. All right.
Okay. Could Knox, could you give us a thumbs up if you can hear us again? Sweet.
Thanks, Knox. And people on Zoom also feel free to use the chat function there to share some memories with each other if you like, so we can then see them afterwards. We're now moving on to have some music by the Ethiopian nun, Emahoy Rebro. And she's actually 96 and she's still alive, so talking of strong women who take life into their own hands. She was a feminist who was the first woman who was a civil servant in the Ethiopian government. So we're now going to play this music.
Called A Mother's Love.
A Mother's Love. And now we have Olive come up and do a reading.
If I should die before the rest of you, break not a flower, nor inscribe a stone, nor, when I'm gone, speak in a Sunday voice, but be the usual selves that I have known. Weep if you must, parting is hell, but life goes on, so sing as well. That was chosen by Marion.
So, as sing as well, so now we're going to move on to a singing and dancing section of the service. And Marion was very adamant that she didn't want to have anything religious at her funeral, but she has chosen this song, By the Rivers of Babylon. And I don't know if she considered this, but it is a Rastafarian adaptation of Psalm 137 that tells the lamentation of the Jews having been exiled from Jerusalem. And this adaptation talks of the longing for liberation from a repressive society. And maybe we can think of this liberation, when we think of liberation and sing this song, we can think of liberation from sickness to health, or from pain into relief, from this world into the next. Or maybe it's just a liberation from isolation into togetherness and us coming together. So we'll now sing this song. I think that Alice and Pete might have there's some dancing moves.
We can just dance.
We're going to sort of dance, and we can maybe come in front of
And
Pete.
the words are in the chat room.
And the words are in the chat room for you.
If you want to sing.
Rivers of Babylon by the Melodians.
I'm going to unmute them so they won't sing.
And if you want to unmute and sound crazy, go for it. Unmute yourselves.
Pull the mic, unmute everybody.
I can't see the.
Get a bit closer. I know the lyrics.
Here, you can hear.
Rivers of Babylon. Yeah.
So Babylon, every step down, and anywhere. I don't know the words. When you remember Zion, the wicked carry us away until we required of us a song. How we singing out this song in a strange land. It carry us away captivity, required from us a song. How can we sing out this song in a strange language? No. Oh no. Attention.
La da da da.
Just away.
Words of meditation of our hearts, be acceptable in thy sight, O God. The words of our mouth, the meditation of our hearts, be acceptable in thy sight, O God.
Those are kids.
Another interlude. I know. I'm just saying your answers on here. It's Ruby. Let's look at Ruby. Yeah. Okay, interlude.
Rivers of Babylon. Oh no. Where we stand down.
Zion.
Okay, and
Of Babylon, where he sat down, and there he wept when he remembered Zion. We did carry us away from eternity, requiring of us the song. How can we sing at the song in a strange land? Wicked carried us away, captivity required from us a song. How can we sing out the song in a strange land?
Sing it, sing it, sing it!
Woo!
That was really good. Really good.
okay, now baby is going to mute you all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh no, we've got the Irish blessing.
Oh.
Everybody can say.
Oh no, no,
Oh, yeah,
actually,
we can
hold
always-
on,
we can
hold
always
on,
stick
hold on.
on to
We can all, next item
Order.
in
Order.
the program. Thank you everybody, that was a lot of energy. Good. I hope everybody feels they've been lifted, their spirits are lifted. So the next item is an Irish blessing. I'm not sure if
We're all
if they all have the words or not.
they most of them had a lot of them
Some
had
of
the
them, some of
program.
you have the program, so it's number 7 in the program. So if we just take a breath in and then out, and then we can start. May the
road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. May the rains fall upon your fields. And until we meet again, may your soul rest in peace.
Okay, and now we have Lewis, one of Marion's grandchildren, to come up and say some words.
I think they're muted here.
Cycled by Lewis.
Hi everyone. I don't know if I was gonna be able to say anything just because I don't know if I'd be able to get the words out, but I thought I have to because I know Granny would want that. So from the very first memory I ever have, you've been there. Throughout my whole life, you've been there. Far or near, always present. It's hard to imagine life without you, because for me and for us, without you, there has been no life. You've seen me at my weakest and my strongest, especially in the past 5 years. And I've seen you at your strongest and your weakest in that same time frame. Although, to be honest, I could never think of you as being weak. I love you. I miss you. Hope I made you proud. Because proud doesn't even begin to describe what you made me feel. Thank you, Granny.
Well done.
Thank you so much, Lois. That was really beautiful. And now we have Alice on the tin whistle doing the Milltown jig, and she's been quite nervous about it, so we'll give her some support.
Thank you, Mia. I picked up this tin whistle after 20 years of not playing because Marion really wanted it for her funeral. So Marion, this is for you. come across. I'm going to start again.
Beautiful. Well done.
Okay, so now we've come to the end of the service, and I'm going to do a few little closing words. So this is kind of a story, and it might seem a bit strange, but I'll tell it anyway. Last night I made a huge lasagna. I didn't mean to, but sometimes you just start cooking and then that's what happens. And it did remind me of the last time I'd made such a big lasagna was when I was living in Oriental Bay, just down the road from Granny, and I lived really close to her for about two years in that flat, and then another 4 years up in the flat that now Bailey and Howie both lived in. So it's been a real treat to live so close to her when I've been in Wellington. So I was living in this little flat. I was still a student, and we didn't have an oven. We just had one of those microwave things that you can actually put metal into, which is weird. So I went over to her apartment one afternoon on a Sunday with all the ingredients for making a massive lasagna, and made one in her kitchen. And so we chatted for a while, and then she eventually needed to go to bed because I was taking just such a long time to make this lasagna. It was really huge, and I was a much slower cook than I am now. And I had to leave before the lasagna cooled down, and the next day I came back and Marion had cut it up into pieces and put those slices into Ziploc bags that I, as a poor student, could then go and put into my freezer, and then I could take things to lunch for university or have an emergency dinner. And like now, I was also single then, just the same as Marion, and I'd taken this tip for being very resourceful from my grandmother. She was of that generation that is very resourceful. Now I think of all of these frozen fish pies and soups and things in her freezer, and I remember the same feeling with my mum, that like there are these things that seem so stupid, and it seems preposterous that you can still have these things this person has made and they're still existing in the freezer, but then she isn't here anymore. And I guess that is just this funny little story to just remind us that everything really is impermanent. Everything, and now it's our time to say goodbye to Marion. And I did think that finishing on a strange frozen food story was a little weird, and I just wondered if, since we're in such a small group here, whether there was anybody else who wanted to say anything.
Can I say something?
Please.
I'm going to stand up and just say it.
This is Liv Taylor is going to speak, but Elizabeth
Should
Taylor.
I turn the computer around a little bit?
Yeah, you can.
It's just that I'm going to miss Marion so much. In the last few months, even, we've talked every afternoon on our old-fashioned landlines, which I call my lifeline. I think I'm the only person left in the world now that Marion's gone, who talked to me on a landline. She was a fabulous travelling companion. We had such good fun, all sorts of places over years. And I'm very privileged to be here this morning. Thank
you.
all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Okay, and I can't see if anyone's made any comments in the
Let's see here.
in the chat, but okay, everyone's just complaining about the sound, sorry. And Peter Day says not a dry eye in the house, and Joanna Steele says, wow, that was heartfelt and gorgeous, Lewis. Thank you so much. Okay. And so you'll see, and thanks everybody for coming. It's like such a strange thing to do it this way, that it's really amazing. We can see all of your faces here, and it makes the room feel much more full. So thank you so much. I'm sorry that we can't be there to hug you and share food and everything like that we normally would. So yeah, it's really beautiful. I'm getting goosebumps just looking at a computer screen. And we're going to plan a memorial for next year on the 27th of March in April. Oh, sorry, 27th of April, sorry. The months just merged now. In Wellington, I think. Okay, so you'll see the second to last item in the program is the committal, and it says placing a potato on the coffin. I tried looking online to see what this whole thing was about putting a potato on the coffin, and I couldn't actually find any much about it in terms of traditions. Although I did come across some photos of potatoes on the grave of Frederick the Great, who was the 18th century ruler of Prussia. And because Marion was such a Europhile and loved a good story, I think I'll just tell this one last story about Frederick the Great's potatoes before we move on. So young Frederick apparently wanted to be a professional flautist when he was a child, but the poor thing was forced into a life of military service by his father. After a successful career, he was eventually buried at Potsdam outside of Berlin at his summer palace. His grave was not next to his wife, but his trusty greyhounds, who he had named after the King of France's mistresses, just to get a rise out of the King of France. Well, one of his greatest accomplishments in his career, apart from the military side of things, was that he introduced potatoes to Germany. He just absolutely loved potatoes. So when not fighting Austrians, he would visit villages around Germany and pass out potatoes. So that's where the potatoes on his grave come from. And I've got no idea about Marion and the supposed Irish tradition, aside from the obvious, but we now have these potatoes here that were dug up from Pete and Alice's garden that we are going to put on the grave. And I think, are we going to do that now?
Yeah, that's right.
On the coffin, sorry.
Let me elaborate on the potato aspect of our funeral proceedings. It was basically Marion and I were trying to think of what to do with the committal and whether to have more flowers and put flowers on the coffin. And we hit upon the idea of putting potatoes on there as a symbol of life and a symbol of the Irish and a symbol of growth. And also, it was really cheap. And it represented Marion not wanting to spend too much money on flowers. Yeah, so we've actually done.
She loved potatoes.
And she loves potatoes. And she wanted if there was going to be a weight, she wanted it to be all different types of potatoes. Potatoes made in many, many different ways, because she absolutely loved potatoes. So we're going to send her to the next life with a lot of potatoes like she loved. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you for sharing your messages. I can see a few things popping up on the chat, and we really hope that we can see you next year in a year. So thank you so much. Is there a way that we can save the chat?
I'm not sure.
Oh, wait.
Yeah, you can.
Music now?
Let's just send a file, I think.
I don't know. Okay.
If you right click on those three buttons down the bottom, it says save chat.
Oh, we can keep the thing going anyway.
Okay, so. Beautiful. Well done.
She would not be happy with this one. Green potato. That would be out. Bless you, buddy. What's that saying? That's more. Here's Bill.
You like potatoes too,
Here's Bill, Marion's brother. There we go. Let's let them see Bill. How are you?
That was beautiful. That was really nice. Yeah, lots of potatoes.
That'll go in with her. Face it the other way, please. Okay, come on, Lily. So I think that's his.
Okay, so we need to move this out.
But we shouldn't stop the meeting because we don't want to lose our chats.
No, should we just minimise this?
Watch us.
Are we just cross there? To see everyone who's there.
Well done, darling.
Tell you what, why don't we just take this outside?
Good effort.
Yeah.
I'll unplug everything.
Take you outside, I think, so you can see the final stages.
Take that as well.
Show the
Yeah, okay.